Instead, they're getting freebies.
So I have a lot to ask about freebies, the state elections, as well as jobs. But just to stick to the growth story for a moment, as your own book, both of you open with acknowledging that India has now overtaken the United Kingdom to become the fifth largest economy in the world. And as I was saying, the S&P numbers suggest that India is well on track to become the third largest economy in the world. Now, Dr. Rajan, I must ask you, you must have followed the fact that supporters of the government pulled out an old interview, a conversation that you had with Rahul Gandhi, where you did not believe that these would be the GDP numbers that you would see, as we've seen in Q2, in quarter two. Do you believe that you were wrong in the projection that you made when you said that, we may not even under 6%?
Yeah, I think the precise statement, which has been replicated ad nauseum by the troll crowd, is that we would be lucky to hit 5% this year. Okay, note those words: lucky to hit 5%. The world economy has been lucky. If you look at projections of US growth at the beginning of the year, it was 1%. As I just said, it hit 5% this quarter, which is 3% above its growth rate. So much of my worry was about the global economy slowing. That hasn't happened. In fact, it's grown even stronger. And that's a common sort of change across the world. It's not something specific to India. There is something specific to India also. The government has gone all out to build infrastructure in the first two quarters, which has helped our growth numbers. That is good, that the government has responded to the slowing by putting out all stops and spending on infrastructure. It's going to become harder as we get into the second half of the year because there's a budget constraint. You can't spend much more than the budget, and we've spent a lot on infrastructure. That said, I welcome any situation where India grows faster than my expectation. I want India to grow. I think it's absolutely
Has India grown faster than your expectations in this past year?
yes, because I said we will be lucky to hit 5, and we are at this point probably going to end the year somewhere in the sixes. That's good. That's absolutely perfect. But the question is, how do we keep at this for the next 20, 25 years, and even expand the pace of growth, because clearly we're not growing fast enough to create the jobs that we need. That is the key question. How do we create those jobs? Because a lot of the growth that we're experiencing even now seems to be relatively jobless.
Let's take that and bring in Dr. Lamba. The growth is relatively jobless, says Dr. Raghuram Rajan. One of the key arguments that I took away from reading the book, and admittedly, I am not a specialist, so I read this as a layperson, is that there is a China way. And it's too late in the day for India to follow the China model, which is an overemphasis on low-skill manufacturing. Do you believe that that is the model that has currently been overemphasized by India's economic planners, Dr. Lamba?
Mute.
Just to put things in perspective, right? China's I think it's good to emphasize aggregate numbers, but to keep ourselves in check, given how large we are in terms of our population, whenever we talk about aggregate numbers, we should do a rain check in our heads about what is the per capita GDP. India's per capita GDP is around $2,500 in current prices. China's is 12.5. Korea, just for context, Korea is around in the mid 30s. China reached 12.5 after spectacular growth. Almost 2 to 3 decades of spectacular growth rate. So just to put in perspective, I think short-term celebrations are very important because it keeps the optimism going, both for investor sentiments and to the morale of the country. But just to have, I think what we're trying to argue in the book is beyond these short-term highs and lows. What is the grand vision? What is the economic vision that India has for itself going forward? Because as we emphasize in the book, there are going to be tens of millions of people joining the labor force every year. What are we doing from them? What jobs are we going to be able to give them? And there is a cookie cutter model that has worked well post World War II for most East Asian economies, right? So if you look at the historical growth of the United States and United Kingdom, they grew very slowly over a large period of time, and they also kind of gave freedom to their people in terms of electoral democracy or also democracy in general over time. This is very important. East Asian countries, why it's called the East Asian growth miracle, were able to kind of clock very high growth rates, much higher than how the trajectory of the United States and the United Kingdom in a shorter span of time. And they did that through this structural transformation story of going from surplus in agriculture to low-skill manufacturing, and then eventually going up the value chain. So going from just assembling iPhones to going higher up the value chain, and then eventually they're now slowly moving towards services. India was an anomaly in two very important ways. A, we were a poor democracy, but a poor consistent democracy. Right? We were consistently democratic. And second, and these things are related, we try to indicate in the book that we kind of jumped in the largest component of the economy from agriculture to high-valued services, both low and high-valued services, but high-value services in particular. And what we're trying to argue in the book is that you should not think of this as a bug, but a feature of the India story.
Right.
And our worry is that we are trying to turn the clock in the emphasis. I mean, we're not trying to make a strong case that India should choose necessarily, but in the emphasis, both the capital, the intellectual capital of the government and the resources that the government is putting in, there is a sense in which we are trying to turn the clock back towards low-skill manufacturing, and we are trying to propose an alternative in which both the political story of India as being a democratic society and the economic story of being an economy which is driven by services, both direct services and services embedded in manufacturing, which we'll come to later in this interview, is very important.
Okay, let me ask you, Dr. Rajan. The sort of end of the book is, a description of India as a country at the crossroads. That's what both of you write, and you say that there is an Indian way. Now, if I were to ask you to define what is that Indian way, so I get that it's not the China way. I get that the sometimes messy but consistently democratic subculture is part of the India story, and if it sometimes slows down growth and sometimes enables growth, so be it. But what is this Indian way, Dr. Rajan?
Well, we are poised in the world for a situation where we move towards much more of an emphasis on ideas, much more of an emphasis on intellectual capital, where machines are going to do much more of the grunt work, whether it's robots in manufacturing or it's AI in some kinds of services. So we really have to be, better than those, and that means we have to capture the higher ground if we want to progress. All these S&P numbers, etc., take for granted that the past will continue replicating for the next 10, 15 years. That can't be taken for granted. You have to sort of create the underlying structure. And what that means is rather than focusing on building buildings, we must focus on building minds. That it is brain rather than brawn which we have to focus on.
Is it either or? Is it either or?
No, it's not either or. Where we have a choice, and we can spend, we must spend much more on generating the human capital. So if you think about what might hold us back in that glorious future 20 years from now, think about how many kids are malnutritioned right now, 35% of kids. These are going to be part of the labor force. How can they compete in an advanced world when their brains are stunted, when their health is not adequate? Similarly, when you look at ASA reports, they present a frightening picture of education, right? In 5th grade, 50% of the kids can't do math at the 2nd grade level. Those are the people we're producing. Of course, we're producing geniuses also, but we need to uplift everyone if we are to have a chance at a strong future. And that means investment in our schools, in health, in education. We don't have one university in the top 100 in the world. How are we going to create that intellectual capital, those original drugs? Are we always going to be catch-up, Me Too kinds of drugs? How can we move to a stronger future? A lot of it lies in strengthening our